Hello again. Welcome to our study, the Akedah. What in the world is an Akedah? Well, I'm glad you asked, and I'm glad you tuned in. We got two sessions for this one. It's a very, very interesting passage, and I think it will show us a lot. This is session number one. Again, we'll do it in two sessions. So let's find out what the Akedah is. Before we do that, let's pray. Father, thank you for what we're about to read. Thank you for the significance and the prophecy that is here stated, that you will one day do exactly what you called Abraham to do. Bless us in our endeavors to understand this passage, and we'll give you praise in Jesus' name. So the Akedah session number one. Well, a term may be strange to our ears, but to the Jew, it's a significant statement which establishes Father Abraham as the patriarch of the Jewish faith. The term is defined as the binding. That's in Hebrew. Now, Genesis 22 is the passage referred to, and it's an incredible account of the faith of a man, all referred to as the father of the Jewish people. This chapter, as well as all biblical accounts, includes some surprises to those diligent enough to dig deeper into the text. We can learn a great deal about the man Abraham and see a distinct pattern that God will develop here in this passage. These few verses include great prophetic importance and offer a glimpse into what will be the pattern which God chooses to bring about salvation for man. Now, before we find out exactly all about the Akedah, a little history first. Abraham, originally Abram, is the common Hebrew patriarch of the Abrahamic religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and also Islam. In Judaism, he is the founding father of the special relationship between the Jews and God. In Christianity, he is the spiritual father, if you will, of all believers, whether Jewish or non-Jewish. And in Islam, he is a link in the chain of Islamic prophets that begin with Adam and culminates with Muhammad. As the namesake of the Abrahamic religion, Abraham is also revered in other Abrahamic religions as well. See, the promise God gave Abraham in Genesis 12, 1 through 3 has become a point of contention for millenniums of time. The fact that many deny the Jews' right to even exist has caused much blood to be shed throughout the centuries. All the nations of the world struggle with these verses. Still today, we see the nations of the world are blessed or cursed as a result of how these verses are embraced. Abraham will have a total of 8 children through 3 different wives. His legacy will live on, as God has stated. He will be the avenue that all men would be blessed. From the loins of Abraham would come a deliverer, one man named Jesus, the very Son of God. Although there are many Jews who find this passage in Genesis 22, we term it the Akedah, as troubling, those who embrace the redemption Jesus offers through his blood find these few verses a monumental truth that cannot go unnoticed. For those who have accepted the salvation offered, it is a testament to God's love for us all. Well, here's the promise. Genesis 12, and this is what is struggling for so many nations across the world. Here's what he says, Genesis 12:1, speaking to Abraham. He says, the Lord told Abram, you are to leave your land, your relatives, your father's house, and go to the land that I'm going to show you. I will make a great nation of your descendants. I'll bless you, and I'll make your reputation great so that you will be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you, and I'll curse the ones who curse you. Read that again. I'll bless those that bless you, and I'll curse the ones that curse you. And through you, all the people of the earth will be blessed. Now, there are nations of the world that deny verse 3. They can't wrap their mind around the idea that they are to bless God's chosen people. Why them? Good question. Something that they battle in every nation of the world. But once again, the promise is sure. I will bless those that bless you, and I'll curse those, the ones that curse you. And every nation in the world today is as a result of what they have done with that verse. Well, here's the predicament. Now, Abraham's supposed to be a father of a great nation. Starting in Genesis chapter 16, we're getting to the Akedah, but Genesis 16:1. Now, Abraham's wife, Sarai, her name will eventually become Sarah, but had not borne a child for him. She had an Egyptian servant girl whose name was Hagar. So Sarah told Abram, "You're well aware that the Lord has prevented me from giving birth to a child, so go have sex with my servant so that I may possibly bear a son through her." Abraham listened to Sarah's suggestion. You see, that was culture at that time. If a woman was barren, could not have children, her handmaid could be given to her husband as we term it, second level wife, and he would go into her, have children with her, and those children would be given to Sarah. It's common. It happened all the time. We go to verse number 3. So Abram's wife, Sarai, took her Egyptian servant Hagar and gave her as a wife to her husband Abraham. In other words, this is a second level wife, if we could use that term. This took place 10 years after Abraham had settled in the land of Canaan. He had sex with Hagar and she became pregnant. When she realized that she was pregnant, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Although God had promised him a son, Sarah, in her haste to help the situation along, has Abraham father a child with Sarah's handmaid, Hagar. Although accepted into custom of that day, it was not God's preference to be helped along. Again, timing is always in God's court. He's never early. He's never late. He's always on time. Well, there's contention, as you can imagine. Chapter 16 and verse 5, then Sarah told Abraham, "My suffering is your fault. I give you my servant. You could have sex with her." And when she discovered that she was pregnant, she looked on me with contempt. "May the Lord judge between you and me." Abraham answered Sarah, "Look, your servant is under your control. Do to her as you wish." So Sarah dealt harshly with Hagar, and she ran away from Sarah. As would be expected, the jealousy between Sarah and Hagar very strong. The first son born to Abraham was Ishmael, was some 14 years old when his little brother Isaac stepped into the spotlight, and immediately hatred for the chosen son was apparent, and soon the contention had to be dealt with. This decision to have a son with Hagar has been a challenge to the Jews until this day. The offspring and ancestry of Ishmael, although difficult to trace, in certainty has in fact caused war and bloodshed between both races for millenniums of time. Hagar and her son were banished, and now the son of promise, Isaac, will take the center stage. Well, God promised to make Abraham a great nation, and all the world will be blessed through him. The problem was that he and his wife Sarah were well into their years. He was 10 years older than his wife, and interestingly as well, she was his half-sister. Well, according to some chronology, Abraham was 75 when he was called. He was 86 when Ishmael was born, and it would be some 14 years later that Isaac would be born. That would make Abraham 100 years old. Abraham would live to be 175 years old, and God, being outside of time restraints, does in fact bless Abraham and Sarah with a son. But it wasn't Ishmael, it was Isaac. Isaac was the son of promise. Ishmael from Hagar was the son of the flesh. Well, here comes the fulfillment. Genesis 21:1, the Lord came to Sarah just as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah conceived and gave birth to a son for Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had predicted. Abraham named his son who was born to him Isaac, the very one whom Sarah bore for him. Now here comes the contention. You can imagine Genesis 21. Let's start at verse number 8. The child grew and eventually was weaned, so Abraham threw a tremendous banquet on the very day Isaac was weaned. Nevertheless, when Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, who was 14 at the time, whom Hagar had borne to Abraham, making fun of Isaac, she told Hagar, "Throw out this slave girl along with her son, because this slave son will never be a co-heir with my son Isaac." Verse 11, Abraham was very troubled about what was being said about his son. Remember now, it was still his son, the son of the flesh. He still loved Ishmael. We go to verse number 12, but God told Abraham, "Don't be troubled about the youth and your slave girl. Pay attention to Sarah and everything she tells you, because your offspring are to be named through Isaac, not Ishmael." Nevertheless, I will make the slave girl's son into a nation, since he, too, is your offspring. Well, they're going to go in different directions. Obviously so. Well, here's what we find in the text as well as history. See, both young men would be fathers of great nations, both Isaac and Ishmael. Both would have sons, and both would carve out a path in history the Bible renders quite clearly. God will have a plan for both, but the chosen seed of the Jews were to come through Isaac. Abraham was assured, as God had so declared, and in this promise, Abraham rested. Well, few would blame Sarah for her impatience in waiting for a promised son. After all, she was getting up there in years. All Jewish women strive for the day they bring a child into the world. To be labeled as barren was often considered to be under divine reproach. In other words, they did something wrong and God was punishing them. The fact that God had promised that Abraham would be the father of a great nation made it even more difficult the older she and Abraham grew. So, Sarai, in her impatience, wanting to help God along, decided to give her handmaid as a second-level wife. Of course, that's my emphasis, if you will, to Abraham to secure the deal. The child would be Sarah's child legally, but all who have had a child know there's nothing quite like having one of your own. Well, this caused a rift that the text explains very easily. Hagar and her child are banished, and the contention between the races is still realized today. Abraham would be, as God said, a father of a great nation. However, Abraham would be tested far beyond anything he could imagine. God would soon call Abraham again, and the test would be beyond anything none of us could consider. Well, that will conclude this session. We'll pick this up on session number 2, and we'll find out all about the Akedah. We'll see you on that study.